by way of introduction, Gurbux Singh has been a very active member in the San Fernando Valley Radio Club for how many decades? Three or four at least.
Yeah.
And a very active CW operator. And I will say, back in one of the early field days about 10 years ago, when my wife was first licensed, and she was at their field day and noticed their 6-meter antenna was pointing the wrong way, everybody told her to leave it alone except Gurbux, who came and helped her, and they turned it around and started working people. So anyway, he's given talks at a variety of clubs and also conventions and so on. I've always been up opposite him for some reason, so I'm really looking forward to this. So Gurbux, it's all yours.
Okay, everybody know where Burma is? I'm sure a lot of people know where Burma is, and some of you might have worked Burmese hams before 1968. The British Empire, was spread out all over Asia during World War and World War II. And India and Burma were colonies. So you could travel from one country to the other without having to get a visa or a passport because they were under the British Empire. So there were a lot of people that had businesses in Burma. Rangoon was the capital. And my father and grandfather had a contracting business there where they were doing construction work, building roads. They even built part of the Burma-China Railway. And in Rangoon, my father had a machine shop and foundry called the Empire Foundry, which was the largest foundry in Burma. And they did all the work there. They used to make stuff. You couldn't go to a store to buy stuff, so you had to make whatever you wanted. And that's how they kept a very busy business going, a machine shop and foundry, where they would make cast iron molds, brass, copper, and even gunmetal. And if somebody had a blown cylinder head from a steam engine, which happened quite often, they would bring it to us, and technicians would make a mold for it, machine it after it's done, and then install it to get the steam engine working. And steam engines were common for most of the ships that were coming in at that time. A few of them had diesel engines, but they were mostly steam engines. And when World War II was in full swing, and the Japanese came in, the Japanese troops were brutal. I mean, they suspected everybody to be a spy, so they would just get rid of them. And it got to a point where my father had to shut down his business and decide what he was going to do next. In 1938, my father got his amateur radio license, and the call was XZ2KN, X-ray Zebra 2, Kilo Nancy. My parents decided the safest way was to trek overland onto India. So what he did with his radio stuff was hide it up in the attic, cover it up with the stuff so the Japanese would not see it, because if he was found with the transmitting equipment, it would be bad. I was born in India, North India, and a state called Punjab. I was born in August of 1943. And I was 3 years old when things improved a little, and they decided to go back. So they went by ship back to Rangoon, and luckily found everything was okay. And he found his radio equipment there. I went to Catholic schools, which meant that it was a place to go for, if you wanted to get a good education, you went to Catholic schools. And the problem was that they were restricting missions to mostly just people who belong to the faith. But my father found out that if you made the right donations periodically, they would bend the rules. And that's how I got in. And, I'm proud I went to the Catholic schools, and it was very tough. They were very strict. The Christian brothers were quick with taking a ruler across the knuckle. And one of the things they did was, I'm left-handed, and I was writing with my left hand, and next thing I know, my pencil flew out of my hand because they hit me across the knuckle and said, "You do not write with the left hand." So they switched me, and I started using my right hand. So I'm ambidextrous now. I was about 10 or close to 11 years old, and Burma was a thriving economy. The British had evacuated, and they left all the equipment down in the fields or by the wayside because it was easier to just dump it and go rather than taking the stuff. So my dad was always picking up stuff which he would find and bring it home. Some of it was excellent stuff, and it was not unusual when he went to like a coffee shop or a store to see someone using a Collins receiver to listen to shortwave broadcasts of the local station. And they had no idea, what these radios were meant for. But my father would, give them a few bucks and take it off the hand. Some of the radios were heavy; they didn't want them, and that's how we kept the station going, because there were no radio shops like HRO or anything in Rangoon, so you had to cannibalize, and that's where I came in. One day, my father took me to go watch a Western movie, where there were, cowboys and robbers. And on one of the scenes, the robbers blew up the railroad tracks. And after a few seconds, my dad said, "Hey, he just sent a message that there's a landslide." And I asked him, "Dad," I said, how do you know? He says, "You know the sounds you were hearing?" He said, "Oh, like the ones we were hearing at home." He said, "Yeah, that's Morse code, and I know that, and that's how I'm able to copy what they sent." And that put a bug in my ear, and I said, "Well, that's interesting." And he had his own Radio Shack in the house. He built a separate room, and that was out of bounds to everybody. The only time we could go in was when my dad was there, and he would say, "Okay, you can come in now." Now, you got to understand that he had wires and cables all over the floor. I mean, he was a real ham, he built stuff. And the other thing was the line voltage in Burma is 230 volts AC. And that kills. And one day my dad showed me that when he was using his transmitter, he took a very insulated screwdriver, and on the final coil, showed a long spark there. And he says, "This will fry you." He says, "So don't even think about touching anything." I asked my dad, I said, "I want to learn how to understand code, and I want to get a license." And he said, "You will have to learn Morse code and go for the test." And he said, "I will help you with that." And so when I came back from school, he had set up a bicycle buzzer with a straight key, and I'm sharing the screen, and I wanted to show his call sign, XZ2KN, and that's my father, Tara Singh, and very powerful signal from Rangoon, Burma. And he told me, he says, "You have to learn the code." And Since the buzzer was too loud, we put it under a cushion to muffle the sound. And every day after school, after I finished my homework, I would practice code. And at the same time, during my free time, he showed me how to, solder stuff and unsolder stuff, because all of the surplus equipment needed, tender loving care to keep it going. We had a couple of RCA AR88 receivers, which are 14 tube receivers, and weigh about 90 or 95 pounds. And they had oil filled capacitors, condensers, and they would leak. So it was a constant job to replace those condensers, and that became my job. And I learned how to read schematics, because he wanted me to diagnose stuff and see if I could fix it. And that was part of my training. This is a picture of my dad. Those days it was AM operation, so he was using a microphone. That is the AR88 receiver with 14 tubes. As you can see, it doesn't have a cover around it, because we were constantly having to work on it to keep it going. Very sensitive receivers. And we had two of them that were in working condition. One was to cannibalize parts. He had, an RCA transmitter, an ET4336. I'm mentioning this because I'm looking at some of the faces, and they might remember these pieces of equipment. They were about 6 feet tall and probably weighed 500 pounds. They had 813s in the finals and 807s to modulate. So it was all old style. No computerized things. Those days, of course, there was no computers, and so I learned how to work on radios, and the transmitters were out of bounds for me, and that's where my dad would help me with. Now, to get a license, I would have to learn the code, which I did, and one of the requirements was code was at 13 words a minute, but you had to build a one-tube receiver and make it work, and explain to the people who were giving the test why it worked and how it worked. So one day when I was 12 years old, he said, well, come on, let's go, let's see if you can get your license. I passed the code with no problem, and showed them the receiver I had built. And two other hams, my dad's friends, they vouched that they had seen me work on radios, and that I was a good candidate to be given a license. And the problem came up that in Burma there is an operator's license and there's a station license, and my dad had both. He held the call exit 2KN, and he was the primary operator. So to make it work, they said, okay, you will be licensed as a second operator for exit 2KN. And if you move out of the house, go to a different location, then you can apply for a station license of your own, and you will get your own call, and you will not have to sign in as a second operator. So my dad liked to, rack chew on AM. He worked, a lot of the Southeast Asian stations, and sometimes he would get people calling him wanting a contact, because Burma was a rare country. Although there were 22 licensed hams at one time, only 3 or 4 were active. One of them was exit 2 TH, Tun, who lived about 2 blocks away from our house. He was on CW because he had a little handicap as far as spoken English was concerned. But He was a good CW operator, and anytime we would sign on the air as XZ2KN, we had a pileup. So it was very difficult. I had to stay on CW for 1 year, and then I was given full privileges that I could, go on phone and work other bands too. So it started out with 40 meters CW, and then I went on to the other bands. And my dad was big on making good antennas because he always believed that if you cannot hear them, you cannot work them. We had a lot of manpower in the machine shop and foundry, and he and I would sit down and make measurements and come up with what we think would work. And we finally came up with this antenna, which was designed for 20 meters. It had a 44-foot boom, and the boom was made of 1.25 inch steel angle iron, which was welded together in a truss design, as you can see. And the elements were copper tubing resting on 6x6 teak supports. And the mast we used was boiler tubes. Boiler tubes are 4 inches OD. They are 4 inches on the outside. They're steel, and they would hold a lot of weight and be very strong. So that was the mast we used. Now to tune it, we didn't have meters or anything. We had microamp meters and milliamp meters. So my dad said we are going to peak it up for maximum reception, and so I took one of his frequency signal generators, the BC221, and there was a building about 1/4 mile away, and I took the frequency signal generator over there, and he had 3 of his employees adjust the length and the spacing of the elements. The driven element was a folded dipole because, well, it became a full-size dipole, but folded, so it would be very efficient, and it was. So once he got these settings right, we used flashlights to signal each other. It was line of sight. We did not have radios at that time to communicate, no cell phones, so we used a flashlight signal, in Morse, and I would tell him, I'm sending a signal, and he would say, okay, and he would have the people adjust it. It took a few hours, and once he got it done, then they lowered the antenna down, and we brazed all the connections. By brazing, I mean, brass copper tubing has to be brazed with brass rods, and it took a little bit of time, but we got it done. The whole assembly weighed about 500 pounds. And now, to turn it, we had to come up with a way to be able to turn it into the direction we wanted. And my dad had an idea, and he says, I'm not going to tell you about it now, but he says, I have seen something by the wayside. I'm going to go tomorrow and get it. So for the bottom of the antenna, where the weight would be, we used a wheel bearing from a tank, front wheel bearing from a tank, and that supported the antenna. Because if it could work in a tank, this 500, 600 pounds was nothing. And so the next day, when I came back from school, he had this contraption sitting there, and it was a winch from the tank, the front winch, which had cables going around it. So from his shack, where he, secured the winch, we had cables running to the mast with the steel cables wrapped around it. And when you turn the handle on that, it would turn the antenna. The handle was a crank that was used to start engines on motor cars those days. So we cut it short and welded it to the winch, and it worked very well. So that was the Armstrong method of rotating it. The other antenna we had was a 600-foot long wire, which was end fed. We had about an acre of land, so we were able to, make use of it. We also built a cubicle quad. Cubicle quad was a very good antenna, and it would outperform the beam at times, but monsoons are brutal in Southeast Asia, and it did not last one season. So we gave up on that. But it was light, and we used bamboo fishing poles for the spreaders. Now, Rangoon was a favorite stop for a lot of people, tourists, and a lot of hams came to Rangoon. And if they came to Rangoon, one of the stops they wanted to make was to see a station. And we had a very good setup, and if there was a station we could hear, we called them and they would reply right away because signal was going through so well. Plus, it was a peak of the sunspot cycle 19, and I'm hoping that cycle 25 is going to be as good as or better than that. 10 meters, 10 watts, and a piece of wire, you could work the states. I remember one day we worked a cop in New York who was on his lunch break. He had a unit on his motorbike, and he was using 10 watts and a vertical. And we had a good QSO with them. My dad was a champion golfer. He was a scratch golfer. If people who play golf know what that means he was like a professional, but he would not turn professional. He wanted his amateur status. One of the hams that came by to visit us was Wayne Green, W2NSD, Never Say Die. He was the editor of the 73 magazine. And he came by, we took him on, to go and see some of the sites around Rangoon and what he wanted to see. And he was very happy. And of course, after I finished my work, I would get into the radio room and start pounding brass. And one day I was doing that, and my mother called out to me, and he says, "Hey, there's a car out there, and you need to come and see who they are and what they want." So I go out there, and it was a chauffeured vehicle with two other people in the car, and a gentleman in the back got out, and we greeted, and he said he was a ham from Jordan, and he had worked a station on AM, and he wanted to see what it looked like. He was looking at the antenna. He says, "Now I know why you have such a good signal." So I took him up to the radio room, and he sat on the control chair. This was on my dad's chair, and started tuning around with the AR-88 receiver. And he just casually mentioned, he says, back home, he says, "I have all Collins equipment." He says, "I like that." He says, "But I see that the stuff you have is very good." And by then, my dad had walked in, and he nodded to Hussein, the gentleman, and my dad said, "Yeah, I want to show you something. Come out here." So I got out of the room, and he goes to another place with me, and he says, "Do you know who that is?" I said, "That's Hussein from Jordan." He says, "That's King Hussein from Jordan." He said, "You don't call him Hussein." I said, he said he was Hussein. He said to call him Hussein. So, I was young. I was only about 12 and a half, 13 years old. And to me, it didn't make any difference who the person was, because if they said there was that it was John, I would do that. I call him John. So my dad comes into the room and he says, "I'm sorry, Your Majesty." He says, "My son did not know who you were." He said, "No, no, no, no. I told him to call me Hussein." He says, "I am Hussein. We are radio amateurs, and it doesn't matter who you are." And he had a good time there. And when he went back, he sent a cookbook for my sister because he had smelled some Indian cooking, and he says it smelled very good. So I'm sending some Jordanian recipes for your sister. We were always hosting people who were coming in. It was one of those things where if somebody was a radio ham, they came in and you never said, "Hey, I'm busy to see you," or we didn't know you were coming. You just be the host. And one day a car from the US Embassy came in. Now, we had a lot of friends in the US Embassy. My dad was a good golfer, and he made friends there. The embassy car pulled up, and two gentlemen got out. One was the American ambassador, who I recognized. And by the way, his name was Henry Byrode, and he used to drive an old Rolls Royce, which we helped put a new Spitfire engine in it. And the other gentleman got out, and I recognized him from the way he looked and his horn-rimmed glasses. And the ambassador said, "This is Senator Barry Goldwater, who is on a private visit. And he is admiring your antenna." And the senator just kept looking at the antenna and kept mumbling, saying that, "I don't believe it. I don't believe it." He was literally not believing that this thing worked and how well it worked. And he had a flight to catch that evening, but he said, "No," he says, "Is it okay if you show me how your station works?" And so I took him upstairs, and he sat down on the chair. I tuned up the transmitter speech amplifier. Incidentally, we built our own speech amplifier. It was a 4-tube speech amplifier. And he started making contacts, one after another, one after another. And the ambassador kept telling him, "Senator, you have to go now. You will miss your flight." He said, "No, just one more. And he spent about 2.5 hours there. And at that time, 1962, the general had an itch to be in power, so he overthrew the civilian government and formed his own Burmese way to socialism, making it slightly different from communism. So if someone thinks that socialism is not like communism, I have lived under it from 62 to 72 actually, yes. And there is no difference. You have no freedom, no constitution. So the military abolished the constitution. They had their own way, and so we knew that sooner or later amateur radio was going to be banned. Now, my dad and I, had friends in the telecommunications department who handled amateur radio. And on January 10, 1968, we found out that starting midnight that night, amateur radio was going to be banned. So I got on the air, my dad got on the air on another band, and we started telling people that this would be our last contact with XZ2KN, with Burma. And the other amateurs were not on the air at all because they were afraid that, the army might come in and give them a hard time. But my dad knew the general because they went to high school together. But, absolute power corrupts. So he told me, he says, don't believe that even though he's my friend, or I could call him my friend, he would not do anything bad. At that time, there was an American family in Burma that were with the American embassy, and he was doing quote unquote farming in the northern state of the Shans, where there was insurgency going on. He became a good family friend. He would come to our house, stay there, and if we were eating lunch, he would just sit down and share a meal with us. We would go there to his farm in Shan State for vacations, and later on we found out that he was with the OSS, which was a precursor to the CIA. One day he came by and he says, I want you to come visit us when I go back to the States. I said, Brad, when are you going to the States? He says, I'm leaving tomorrow. They want me out by tomorrow night. And he says, I will send you the papers and we will take care of everything. So I started going to the American embassy to do my paperwork, and back and forth, and not realizing that there were things that were not. That's my dad, 73 magazine, and he saw that a lot of clothes were in short supply, so he sent a whole package. Okay, that's my dad when he won the golf championship, amateur golf champion, 1962, on the front page of the newspaper, the largest newspaper in Burma. And so I started going to the American embassy and started doing that in 1969, and I got approved for a visa, and then found out that the Burmese government would not give me a travel document. So since I was born in India, which was a British colony, I qualified for a British passport. So I started going to the British embassy, put the American visa on hold, and on June 12, 1972, a van pulls up, and I was told that the captain wants to see me. And of course, they blindfolded me and took me away, and a lot of interrogation. And I was thrown into an 8-foot by 8-foot cell, and I spent 17 months and 16 days in that, in solitary. Sometimes going a week without having to wash myself, without soap, no toothbrush, no toothpaste, nothing. And I was told I was not a criminal, that I was in protective custody. That was the term they would use to take people away. It was easier for them to pick people off the street and not have to follow them. It's then I realized that while I was going to the embassies, they must have been following me. But my family told the British embassy that I had been taken in. First, they denied knowing anything about it, and then finally let me go. And I'm not going to go into details now because I see that time is getting short, and that is something which I might share with anyone who might want to listen to it as a presentation. It would give you goosebumps, and I kid you not. And so I was let go in November of 1973, and taken from there, brought to the house, given 1 hour to meet my family. And that is the reason I don't have many pictures, because this was something which my family was able to scrounge in the few minutes they had, because I said, hey, give me some pictures, and I was then informed that I was to be flown out of the country and go to Singapore. My dad used to have a daily QSO with a ham in Singapore, 9V1NR, 9 Victor 1 November radio, and told me that when I got to the airport to give him a call and ask him for help. So I did that, and he was gracious enough to take me home and asked me, if I had a place to stay. I said no, and he says, well, we have an extra room, you can stay here. He says, I know your dad. Your dad has visited us when he came to play golf for representing the country. So I stayed at the house, and after a few days, I noticed there was a young lady in the house who would leave early and come in late, and sometimes, she would just smile and walk away. And it was a doctor's daughter. And long story short, I asked her to marry me, and we got married in Singapore, and came to the States, and ended up in Springfield, Illinois. And from average temperature of 85, 90 degrees, 90% humidity, I was in Springfield, where there was a blizzard going. At that time, it was middle of March, and didn't have extra clothes to put on, but somehow made it to my sponsor's house, and stayed with them for a few weeks, and then found a job with the Ford dealership. And one day I was at the store and noticed a car with ham license plates, K9HDZ, and went into the store and got the supplies. And as I was checking out, I heard someone say, hey, we got some DX in Rochester now. Rochester was a village where we were living. And I got outside and I said, walked over to the car and asked him, I said, did you mention DX? He says, why, do you know what it means? He said, and I, told him who I was, and he got me some information how to get a license. And I want to acknowledge one of the hams who is, I think, watching this presentation, which has not been going on well, because I thought I had everything, all the ducks lined up, but somehow the screen sharing is not working. But his name is John Swartz, WA9AQN, Whiskey Alpha 9 Alpha Quebec Nancy. And he and I have regular QSOs on CW. He is also a CW fiend and a very good operator. And John, hi to you. And one of the things I do, I'm a mechanical engineer by background. In my free time, I'm retired now. Oh, John Swartz just waved. And I make my own keys and paddles. Here's a set of paddles I made, solid brass. It weighs about 5 pounds, maybe more. And it's got magnetic returns. And I also modified a Kent set of paddles. These are the paddles John Swartz gave me because I did not have a set of paddles. And instead of the springs, I have put in magnetic return now. I modified it. So it has improved the feel of it. Here is a straight key I made. Again, a solid brass. This is a knob from one of the drawers. And I don't have any machines or anything, milling machines or anything. It's mostly hacksaw, file, and a drill press. So, when you have free time and you have imagination, you can do everything. And I think at this time, if anybody has questions, I'd be willing to answer them, and I will be open to whatever questions you have. I don't put any restrictions or limits, so I'm listening.
Okay, we're open for questions. Raise your hands. I see Marty's got his hand raised up, so go ahead, Marty.
Thanks. Gurbux, thank you very much. This is fascinating. And I must say, I'm really impressed with that truss boom that your father made for that 20-meter antenna.
Yeah.
Everybody's just used to using tubing and so on. And when you consider the incredible increase in strength of what he designed, I don't think anybody would think of making a boom of angle steel these days, but it could probably survive just about anything. I think that was brilliant. And and your handwork on those keys and paddles is also just awesome. You've got a real talent there, but thank you so much.
And I just want to mention that I also volunteer on the battleship USS Iowa, and go there Wednesday mornings, work CW using the ship's call NI6BB, November India 6 Bravo Bravo, and John Swartz, W9AKN. Pretty much every time we have a QSO from the ship also. And
excellent.
I have some pictures, but I'm not going to try to screen share with them, where I got to ring the ship's bell when it was filled with people, because I completed 1,500 hours of volunteer service. Okay, next question, anybody?
Well, gee, Peter, you got your hand up. Let's go for it.
Okay. I just was going to ask, what's your current station look like?
Okay.
Are you still using Collins?
No.
Okay.
I'm using DX3000, FTDX3000. I don't know if you can see it here.
Yes, we can.
Okay. And I have a microphone somewhere, but it's mostly CW. I also have a Meriton amplifier. It puts out 1,000 watts. Very seldom have I used it. And I have a 72-foot crank-up tower with a DB36 4-element stepper on it. And also able to work VHF and UHF. But right now we're in the process of trying to sell this house, which I think is getting close to being sold. So I will be wanting to have someone make me an offer on taking down this antenna system, tower, the stepper, and everything. And of course, all the controllers go with it, the cables and all that. So make me an offer, and it's all yours. But you would have to take it down, and you would have to be sure that you can handle the job, or get somebody to do it for you.
Or buy the house with the antenna installed.
Well, that's always a possibility, And I was hoping some ham would come by, but the housing market isn't what it used to be. So maybe the antenna will have to be looking for another home.
Okay, you're going to stay on the air afterwards, though? You plan to get...
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would lose sleep if I was not on the radio.
Okay. Barry, there's some comments in chat. You want to read some of them?
I can. Let me see. Let me go back. Lion Victor Everett said, I didn't get his whole full name. It sounds like you've had much fun with the hobby. Thanks for sharing your great story. And Dave says he's glad that you were able to tell your story. What a tremendous privilege it is to hear it. Very beautiful tears. Those are the comments.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. And I just want to emphasize that, I landed in this great country with $5 in my pocket when I landed in Springfield, Illinois. And a lot of the hams there, got me started in radio gain. I went to the FCC office in Peoria, Illinois, which was an 80-mile one-way trip, and got my license there, and then upgraded here in California. And it is a great hobby. It is an excellent hobby, and we live a very comfortable life. Both my kids were born and brought up here because they have that entitlement attitude, which I'm trying to redirect. And my grandkids are the same way, and I can understand that. But it's been a great journey, great life, and I've lived on both sides. And let me tell you, with all these flaws, look at the good side. We have the best thing in the world here.
And we hope to keep it that way.
Yeah, yeah.
when a knife maker is making a knife or a sword, it takes a lot of heating and pounding and until it becomes the best that it can be.
Mhm.
And I think you've taken a lot of heating and pounding yourself.
Yep.
And it shows in the strength of what you're able to put up with and how you've succeeded. So congratulations.
Yeah, I started out working 3 jobs, and then built my own house in Illinois. And John W9AQN also came to help. He's an attorney, by the way. He's retired now, but at that time he was working as a corporate attorney, and he helped me build my house too. So it's like building a barn. Everybody comes by and helps out. There's a lot of fried chicken and beer to go around, so that's what keeps it going. And
we should say welcome to John. I'm very glad you encouraged him to join us.
Oh yeah. Very few people I can call friends, and he's one of them. He's one of them. When he visits LA, he comes and stays with us, and I'm hoping to surprise him one of these days and knock on his front door and look at him, with his mouth open.
Beer
And if
ticket.
you see some more pictures, check out W6BUX on QRZ. There's lots of
Yes. If you go on QRZ.com, you'll see some pictures, and I will, try to figure out what goes wrong. I used to have Windows, and Ham Radio Deluxe decided that they were not going to support Mac unless I ran a dual program. So I got into MacLogger, which is working very well, by the way. But there are other things which somehow Mac does not want to be so loving about Windows programs.
Okay, after we close these down, after these meetings, I leave them open. So in other words, you can come back in and see who's around or whatever, chit chat. But you can also use that to play with their stuff and see how, play a little bit with Zoom and play around with it.
Yeah, I'll stay around.
Okay. All right, are there any more questions out there? I don't see hands.
We're good in chat. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Yes, thank you. It's been a very good one. Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming on and your story, and it was an eye opener. Appreciate that very much.
Thank you for having me.
Purely our pleasure. Believe me, purely our pleasure. Okay, I'm going to say 73s and pull the plug.